The transport shuttle hummed with that particular frequency that made your teeth feel like they were trying to escape your skull. I'd been in enough of these military-grade death traps to know the sound meant we were about to break atmosphere, which meant the next few minutes would either be incredibly boring or incredibly brief. The Zelkari instructor across from me didn't seem concerned. Then again, Zelkari never seemed concerned about anything. Their faces were all sharp angles and membrane-covered eyes that blinked sideways, and they had this way of sitting perfectly still that made you wonder if they'd been bolted to their seats. "Sergeant Chen," the instructor said, his voice clicking through the translator implant behind my ear, "you will observe proper protocol upon arrival. No touching of equipment, no questioning of procedures. No." "I know the drill," I said. "I've read the briefing packet, all 47 pages of it." The Zelkari's eye membranes slid sideways in what I'd learned was their version of skepticism. "You read the packet?" "Cover to cover." I'd actually skimmed most of it, but the parts about not dying had seemed important enough to remember. Section 12, subsection 3. Human personnel are to maintain a minimum distance of 3 meters from all primary weapons systems. Section 14. Complaints regarding environmental systems will be logged and reviewed within 7 to 10 standard cycles. Section 22. Survival is not guaranteed, and all personnel have signed appropriate waivers. The instructor made a sound like rocks grinding together. I'd learned that was laughter. "The Terrans always send their most interesting candidates," he said. "You are the 3rd human to join this training cohort. The first 2 are no longer with us." "Dead." "Transferred." His eye membranes did that sliding thing again. "To other assignments far from here." The shuttle lurched, and I grabbed the armrests. Outside the viewport, the orange-brown surface of Vorkath 7 rotated into view. It wasn't a pretty planet. Nothing about this system was pretty. The star was a dying red giant that painted everything in sickly hues of rust and blood, and the atmosphere was thick with particulates that made the sky look like someone had shaken a snow globe full of dirt. "Welcome to the Vorkath training facility," the instructor said. "Home of the Galactic Coalition's elite military preparatory program. For the next 6 months, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. You will." "Air conditioning," I said. The instructor paused. "I beg your pardon." The briefing packet mentioned environmental controls. I pulled up my datapad and scrolled to the relevant section. It says here that environmental systems are designed to maintain optimal conditions for all species present. But the packet also lists the species composition of the facility: 93% Zelkari, 6% various others, less than 1% human. "Your point." "Zelkari prefer temperatures between 32 and 38 degrees Celsius. Humans prefer about 22. That's a difference of at least 10 degrees. In a facility where 93% of the population is Zelkari, I'm guessing the environmental systems are calibrated to Zelkari preferences." The instructor's eye membranes did that slide again. "The environmental systems are set to galactic standard temperature, a compromise. Galactic standard is 36 degrees, which is the average of all coalition member species." I did the math in my head. You can't average temperatures across species. That's not how biology works. A temperature that's comfortable for your species is literally lethal for some others. The Vrexi can't survive above 30 degrees. The Norgal can't survive below 40. The Vrexi and Norgal are not represented in this training cohort. Right, because they die, but humans are here and we're just supposed to, what? Sweat through our advanced combat training. The shuttle landed with a bone-jarring thud that interrupted any further argument. The instructor unstrapped himself with fluid grace, his 4 limbs moving in that unsettlingly synchronized way Zelkari had. "Welcome to your new home, Sergeant Chen," he said. "Try not to die in the first week. It would be inconvenient for the paperwork." The facility was exactly as grim as the briefing packet had suggested. A sprawling complex of prefabricated structures set into the base of a mountain range that looked like the petrified ribs of some ancient beast. The air was thick and hot, and smelled of sulfur and something metallic that I couldn't identify. The sky was perpetually orange, and the sun never seemed to move, just hung there like a malevolent eye watching everything. I was assigned to Barracks Block 7, which turned out to be a long, low building with a corrugated roof and walls that looked like they'd been assembled from salvaged cargo containers. Inside, the heat was worse. The air was stagnant and heavy, and the only sound was the constant hum of equipment that didn't seem to be doing anything useful. My bunk was in the corner, next to a window that was supposed to open but was welded shut. The mattress was thin and smelled of some alien disinfectant that burned my nostrils. The locker at the foot of the bed was empty except for a single towel that felt like sandpaper. I sat on the edge of the bunk and tried to adjust to the heat. My uniform was already soaked through with sweat, and I could feel a headache starting to form behind my eyes. The briefing packet had mentioned that the facility was on a planet with a 36-hour rotation cycle, which meant my circadian rhythm was about to get thoroughly wrecked. New meat. I looked up. A figure was leaning in the doorway, silhouetted against the orange glow from outside. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out a female human in a similar uniform, her face lined with exhaustion and something else, something that looked like resignation. "Sergeant Chen," I said. "Private First Class Medina." She stepped inside and dropped onto the bunk opposite mine with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her bones. "Welcome to paradise. Population, us. A bunch of lizards who think they're gods and a whole lot of nothing." "Lizards." "Zelkari." She waved a hand vaguely. "Close enough. They're all scales and sideways eyes and superiority complexes. They run this place like it's their personal army, and we're just lucky to be allowed in their presence." I studied her. She looked young, maybe early 20s, but there was something old in her eyes, something that had seen too much too quickly. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 4 months. 4 more to go, assuming I don't die or get transferred." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The instructors here have a bet on how long the new human will last. The over-under is 43 days. "That seems specific." "Zelkari are specific about everything. They've calculated your exact odds of survival based on your physical stats, psychological profile, and the fact that you complained about the air conditioning within 5 minutes of landing." I blinked. "How do you know about that?" "Word travels fast in a facility this small." She leaned back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. "Also, the instructors are petty enough to broadcast complaints to the entire base. They wanted everyone to see the new human weakness." "It's not a weakness. It's a legitimate biological requirement." "Tell that to them." She gestured vaguely toward the door. "To a Zelkari, complaining about heat is like complaining about breathing. They don't understand why we can't just adapt. They think we're weak." "I'm not weak." "I know." She sat up and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "But they don't. And they're going to test you. That's what they do. They test everyone, but they test humans especially hard. They want to prove that we don't belong here." "Did the other 2 humans get transferred because they failed?" She laughed again. "No, they got transferred because they passed. They passed so hard that the instructors couldn't figure out what to do with them, so they shipped them off to assignments that would keep them far away from any Zelkari command structure." "That seems counterproductive." "That's the coalition for you." She lay back down and closed her eyes. "Get some rest while you can. Training starts at 400 tomorrow, and believe me, you'll need all the energy you can get." I lay back on my bunk and stared at the ceiling. The heat pressed down on me like a physical weight, and I could already feel the sweat soaking into the thin mattress. The hum of equipment seemed to grow louder. And I realized it was coming from the ventilation system. A system that was supposedly designed to maintain optimal conditions, but was clearly set to something far above optimal. The headache was getting worse. "Hey, Medina," I said, "what do you know about the environmental controls?" She opened one eye. "What about them? Is there any way to adjust them, to make it cooler?" She sat up slowly, her expression shifting to something more alert. "You're really fixated on this, aren't you?" "I'm fixated on not dying of heat stroke before I get to do any actual training." "I mean, you're not wrong." She rubbed her face. "It's hot as balls in here. Always has been. The Zelkari think it's comfortable, so they assume everyone else does too. And the coalition doesn't care because humans make up less than 1% of the population, and they figure a few humans dying of heat stroke isn't a priority. And you're okay with that?" "I'm not okay with anything." She swung her legs over the side of the bunk and sat up. "But what am I going to do about it? File a complaint? They'll just laugh and add it to my file. They've got a whole section for human complaints now. It's thicker than the operational manual." I sat up too. "Show me where the environmental controls are." She stared at me. "What?" "The controls, where are they?" "Sergeant, I don't think." "I'm not going to do anything stupid. I just want to see if they're adjustable." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face for something. Maybe sanity, maybe desperation. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but if we get caught, I'm telling them you held a knife to my throat." The control room was at the end of a corridor that felt like a furnace. The walls were lined with pipes that were warm to the touch, and the air was so thick I could practically taste it. Medina led me through a maze of identical hallways until we reached a door marked in Zelkari script that I couldn't read. "Here," she said, "but we can't go inside, it's monitored." "I don't need to go inside. I just need to see the console through the window." The window was small and grimy, but through it I could see a bank of controls that looked outdated even by human standards. A single Zelkari technician sat at the console, tapping at screens with an air of profound boredom. "There," I said, pointing. "That's the environmental control system." "Okay, so you've seen it. Can we go back now?" "Wait," I pressed my face closer to the window. "Look at that readout, the temperature setting." Medina peered through the glass. "It's set at 34 degrees, Zelkari standard." "But look at the range." I pointed at a series of numbers on the screen. "See those other readings? That's the temperature outside the facility. It's almost 40 degrees out there, but the system is still trying to keep the inside at 34. So the cooling capacity is going to be overwhelmed by the ambient heat. The system is probably running at maximum efficiency, but can't keep up because the Zelkari set the thermostat to a temperature that's already higher than the outside temperature on some days." Medina stared at me. "Do you have any idea what you just said?" "I said the Zelkari are terrible engineers." I pulled out my datapad and started taking notes. The technician inside didn't seem to notice us, too focused on whatever was on his screens. "What are you doing?" Medina asked, her voice taking on a note of panic. "I'm figuring out how to fix the air conditioning." "Fix? Sergeant, you can't just fix the air conditioning. It's a military facility. You have to go through proper channels, you have to file forms, you have to get approvals." "I don't care about approvals." I was already running calculations in my head, comparing the facility's power output to the cooling system's capacity. The existing system is undersized for the external environment. It can't keep up because it's trying to maintain a temperature that's too high relative to the environment. That doesn't make any sense. Think of it this way. I turned to face her. The system is trying to maintain the temperature at 34 degrees. The outside temperature is 40 degrees, so the system has to work hard to lower the temperature by 6 degrees. If we lowered the target temperature to 25 degrees, the system would have to work even harder to lower the temperature by 15 degrees. But if we instead just open the windows and let the outside air in, the temperature would naturally settle somewhere in between. Medina blinked. You want to open windows? I want to redesign the entire environmental control system. I pocketed my datapad. But opening windows is a start. This is crazy. This is completely crazy. Probably. I started heading back toward the barracks. But I'm not going to spend 6 months sweating to death in a facility that could be comfortable with a few simple modifications. Sergeant, wait. Medina hurried after me. What do you think you're going to accomplish? Even if you figure out how to fix the environmental controls, the Zelkari won't let you implement any changes. They'll see it as criticism of their systems. They can see it however they want. I turned back toward her. I'm not asking for permission. I'm going to fix the problem. And if they try to stop you? I paused, considering the question. It wasn't something I'd given much thought to. From what I could tell, the Zelkari approach to problem-solving was mostly about shouting louder than everyone else and hopping the problem went away. That wasn't going to work with a temperature problem. I'll deal with that when it happens, I said. Right now, I need to figure out where the ventilation shafts are. Part 2, the schemes. The ventilation system turned out to be a piece of work, not in a good way. After 3 days of careful observation, I'd mapped out the entire system. It was a sprawling network of ducts and pipes that ran throughout the facility, carrying heated air from the living quarters to the exterior. The system was designed to work in a lower temperature environment, with the assumption that the facility would be heated, not cooled. On Vorkath 7, with its hellish surface temperatures, the system was essentially a giant death trap, which meant I had to find a way to bypass it entirely. The solution came to me on the 4th night, as I was lying in my bunk trying not to think about how much I was sweating. The facility was built into a mountain range, and the mountain range was riddled with natural caves. Somewhere in those caves, the temperature was probably significantly cooler than the surface. All I needed to do was find a way to tap into that cooling effect. Medina, I said, sitting up abruptly. She groaned from her bunk. It's 200, go back to sleep. I've got it, I know how to fix the cooling. You're still on that. I'm always on that. Come on, I need you to help me find something. She sat up, her face a mask of exhaustion and exasperation. What are you looking for now? A map of the mountain. There has to be a geological survey somewhere in the facility's records. What do you need a geological survey for? I need to find the caves, the natural ventilation shafts, the places where the mountain's internal temperature can be tapped into. Medina stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my surprise, she laughed. You're actually going to do this, aren't you? She said. You're really going to try to fix the air conditioning by drilling into a mountain. It's not drilling, it's redirecting airflow. That's drilling. Okay, it's mostly drilling, but it's strategic drilling. The geological survey was in a locked cabinet in the administrative wing, which meant I had to break in. Not the most glorious beginning to my career as an environmental engineer, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Medina kept watch while I worked on the lock. The cabinet was old and the lock was simple. Clearly the Zelkari had never heard of modern security measures. Either that, or they figured the heat would deter any would-be intruders. What's taking so long? Medina hissed from the doorway. Almost got it. Hurry up, I hear someone coming. I jiggled the lock, felt it give, and opened the cabinet. Inside were dozens of data slates, all labeled in Zelkari script. I grabbed the one marked Geological Survey VORKATH 7 and shoved it into my pocket. Got it, let's go. We slipped out of the administrative wing just as a Zelkari patrol rounded the corner. Medina pulled me into a maintenance closet, and we stood there in the dark, barely breathing, as the patrol passed by. Okay, Medina whispered. Okay, that was close. Yeah, I felt the data slate in my pocket, solid and real. But we have what we came for. What do you think you're going to find in there? But I think I'm going to find a way to cool this place down without pissing off the Zelkari, or at least without pissing them off too much. The data slate was a goldmine. The geological survey was detailed and comprehensive, mapping out the entire mountain range in three-dimensional detail. The caves were extensive, running for kilometers into the mountain's interior, and at certain depths, the temperature dropped significantly, down to about 15 degrees Celsius. All I needed to do was find a way to tap into those caves and redirect the cooler air into the facility's ventilation system. The problem, of course, was that the ventilation system was designed to push air out, not pull air in. The fans were all oriented to exhaust heat, not to bring in cooler air. To redirect airflow, I'd have to reverse the fans and create a new intake system. That meant modifications, lots of modifications. Are you actually going to take this to the instructors? Medina asked, reading over my shoulder. Of course not, they'd never approve it. So you're going to do it without permission. I'm going to do it and ask for forgiveness later. It's a time-honored human tradition. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I spent every spare moment studying the ventilation system and planning my modifications. I drew up schematics, calculated pressure differentials, and worked out exactly where I'd need to cut into the ductwork. Medina helped when she could, though she was always looking over her shoulder. The other trainees, mostly Zelkari, with a few others from various coalition species, had taken notice of my activities, though none of them seemed to understand what I was doing. The instructors also took notice. Lieutenant Karel, the head instructor, made a point of showing up at my training sessions with a distinctly skeptical air. "Sergeant Chen," he said one day, his eye membrane sliding sideways, "I understand you've been spending a great deal of time in the maintenance corridors." "Yes, sir." "Care to explain why?" "I'm conducting a study of the facility's environmental systems, sir. I believe there are significant improvements that could be made." "Improvements." The word came out flat and dead. "You believe you can improve upon systems designed by Zelkari engineers?" "I'm not questioning their expertise, sir. I'm simply exploring alternatives." Lieutenant Karel made that grinding sound that passed for laughter. "Alternatives. You humans and your alternatives, always trying to reinvent the wheel, always thinking you know better than those who came before. With respect, sir, the wheel was invented by humans, on Earth, thousands of years ago." The grinding laughter stopped abruptly. "Your arrogance is noted, Sergeant. I suggest you focus your attention on your training, not on systems you do not understand." "Yes, sir." Of course, I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Every night when I lay in my bunk and felt the heat pressing down on me, I saw the schematics in my head. I saw the caves and the ductwork and the mathematical solution to the problem that was making everyone's lives miserable. I was so focused on the technical aspects that I almost missed the other problem. The other humans. There were only 3 of us in the facility. Me, Medina, and a specialist named Johnson who worked in the communications section. Johnson was a quiet man, the sort who kept his head down and tried not to attract attention. He'd been at the facility for 6 months, and he seemed to have accepted the heat as an immutable fact of life. Which meant he didn't think much of my plan. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said, after I'd explained my schematics to him. "The Zelkari don't respond well to humans trying to fix their systems. They see it as an insult." "I'm not trying to insult them. I'm trying to make the facility livable." "Livable is relative." He leaned back in his chair, his face sheened with sweat. "I've been here 6 months. I've adapted. You'll adapt too." "That's not adapting. That's suffering through something that doesn't need to be suffered through." Johnson sighed. "Look, I'm not saying your plan isn't sound. I'm a comms specialist. I don't know anything about ventilation systems, but I know the Zelkari. I've seen what they do to people who challenge their authority. What do they do? Nothing overt, that's the thing. They won't court-martial you or throw you in the brig. They'll just make your life miserable. Extra training sessions, unreasonable demands, assignment to the worst duties. They'll push you until you break or until you transfer out. That's what they did to the other two humans. Pretty much. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. That's what they do to everyone who doesn't fit their system. It's not just us, either. The Vrexi who were here before got the same treatment. And the Norgal, anyone who doesn't see the universe the way they do. I thought about what he'd said. I thought about the heat and the sweating and the constant headache that had become my constant companion. I thought about the other trainees, mostly Zelkari, who seemed completely comfortable in conditions that were slowly killing me. And I thought about the caves, about the cooler air that was sitting just a few meters away, waiting to be tapped. I understand, I said, but I'm not going to let fear stop me from doing what's right. Johnson looked at me for a long moment, then he shook his head. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said. I haven't decided which yet. Probably both, I said, probably both. Part 3, the drilling. The drilling started on a Friday, or at least what passed for Friday on a 36-hour rotation cycle. I'd lost track of the actual calendar weeks ago. The plan was simple in theory, complex in execution. I'd identified a section of the mountain where the rock was thin enough to drill through and the cave system was close enough to the surface to tap into. The drilling would be done by hand, using standard maintenance equipment that I'd borrowed from a storage locker. Medina and Johnson had agreed to keep watch. The Zelkari instructors were in a briefing session that was scheduled to last at least 4 hours, which gave us a window. Are you sure about this? Medina asked, for what must have been the 20th time. I'm sure. I had the drill in my hands, a heavy piece of equipment that vibrated with barely contained power. The temperature differential alone should be enough to create a natural convection current. Once the hot air starts flowing out, the cooler cave air will flow in. That's a lot of jargon for, I'm drilling a hole in a mountain. I'm drilling a strategic hole in a strategic mountain. There's a difference. Not to the Zelkari, there isn't. I ignored her and started the drill. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched whine that echoed off the mountain walls. The rock was harder than I'd expected, and the drill bit struggled to make progress. Sweat poured down my face, and my arms ached with the effort. Faster, Johnson hissed from his position at the corridor entrance. You have maybe 3 hours left. I'm going as fast as I can. The drill bit started to smoke. I backed off, letting it cool for a moment, then pressed forward again. The rock gave way with a grinding sound, and I felt a rush of cool air against my face. Got it, I said, I'm through. The hole was small, maybe 20 centimeters across, but it was enough. Cool air was pouring through the opening, and I could feel the temperature dropping around me. Okay, now the ductwork, I said. We need to connect this to the ventilation system. The next hour was a blur of activity. I worked quickly, bypassing the existing system and redirecting airflow through the new opening. The cave air was cooler and drier than the surface air, and it flowed naturally into the facility's corridors. By the time I was done, the temperature in the corridor had dropped by at least 5 degrees. It's working, Medina said, her voice full of wonder. You actually did it. Don't celebrate yet. We still have to connect the rest of the facility. This is just the first stage. The second stage was more complicated. The facility was massive, and the ventilation system was a sprawling network of ducts and pipes. Connecting the entire thing to the cave system would require dozens of additional openings and a complete rerouting of airflow. But I had a plan. I always had a plan. The key was to create a passive cooling system. Instead of relying on fans to move air, I'd use the natural temperature differential to create a convective loop. Hot air would rise and be pushed out of the facility, while cooler air from the caves would be drawn in to replace it. It was elegant in its simplicity. It was also completely unauthorized. "You're crazy," Johnson said when I explained it to him. "You're absolutely crazy." "Crazy like a fox." "I don't know what that means." "It means I'm going to make this facility comfortable if it kills me." The next few weeks were a constant battle of wills. I worked on the ventilation system whenever I could, always careful to avoid the instructor's notice. Medina helped when she could, and even Johnson started to come around, offering suggestions for how to route the airflow more efficiently. The instructors noticed, of course. Lieutenant Carell made a point of showing up in the maintenance corridors whenever he heard drilling sounds. "Sergeant Chen," he said one day, his eye membranes doing that sideways slide, "I've noticed a remarkable drop in facility temperatures." "Have you, sir?" "Yes. In fact, the environmental systems are reporting conditions that are unusual. Several of the Zelkari instructors have complained about the cold." "I'm sorry to hear that, sir." "Are you? Because I have reason to believe that you are responsible for this." Chain. I met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I'm just a trainee. I don't have the authority to make changes to the facility's systems." "No, you don't. And yet the changes continue to happen. Coincidence, I suppose." "Coincidence is a mysterious thing, sir." The grinding laugh. "You think you're clever, don't you, Sergeant? You think you've found a way to circumvent the system." "Circumvent is such a strong word, sir. I prefer optimize." The air between us crackled with tension. I could see the other Zelkari instructors watching from the corridor, their eye membranes flickering with interest. "You have 1 hour," Lieutenant Carell said finally. 1 hour to undo whatever you've done. If the temperature is not restored to Zelkari standard by that time, I will have no choice but to file charges." "What charges, sir?" "Sabotage, theft of government property, operating equipment without authorization. The list is quite extensive. I've been adding to it as I've been preparing my report." "I see." I kept my face calm, but my mind was racing. And what would happen if I were to be charged with these crimes? "You would be transferred, possibly court-martialed. At minimum, your training would be terminated. Your career would be over." "I see." I paused, considering my options. "And what would happen if I were to instead provide a detailed explanation of how the changes were made, so that the system could be properly maintained?" Lieutenant Carell's eye membranes flickered. "Explain." "The changes I've made are not sabotage. They're upgrades. The system was undersized for the external environment which was causing inefficiencies. I've simply optimized the system to work better in the local conditions." "Without authorization?" "Without authorization, yes. But the results speak for themselves. The temperature in the facility has dropped to a more moderate level, which has actually increased efficiency across the board. Trainees are more alert, fewer complaints about environmental conditions, and—" "There have been complaints about environmental conditions," Lieutenant Carell interrupted, "from the Zelkari instructors. The facility is too cold for their comfort." "Too cold is relative, sir. The temperature is currently 28 degrees. That's well within the acceptable range for most species." "Not Zelkari." "With respect, sir, the Zelkari are not the only species in the coalition, and they certainly aren't the only species in this facility. The temperature I've created is a compromise, a balance." Lieutenant Carell stared at me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning behind his eye membranes, the calculation of costs and benefits. "The maintenance corridors are off limits," he said finally. "All personnel are to stay out of them unless specifically authorized." "Understood, sir." "And you will not make any further modifications to the system without direct approval from my office." Understood, sir. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That was close, Medina said from behind me. Really close. Yeah, I wiped the sweat from my forehead, but it worked. Did it? Because it sounds like he just told you to stop. Told me to stop, yes. I allowed myself a small smile, but he didn't tell me to undo what I'd already done, and he didn't threaten to file charges. So, you won. I wouldn't go that far. I looked at the ductwork, at the system I'd created, but I'd say we're a lot closer to the goal than we were before. Part 4, the testing. The next few weeks were the calm before the storm. The facility temperature stabilized at around 28 degrees, which was still warm by human standards, but was significantly better than the 34 degrees we'd been dealing with before. The Zelkari grumbled about the cold, but they stopped complaining when Lieutenant Karel himself was seen wearing a slightly heavier uniform. The training continued apace. I discovered that I was actually good at combat scenarios, good enough that the Zelkari instructors started treating me with something approaching respect. It was grudging respect, the kind you give to a dangerous animal that's been temporarily tamed, but it was respect nonetheless. But the peace couldn't last. It started with a notice from the facility command. All personnel were required to attend a mandatory briefing. The briefing was about the upcoming field evaluation scheduled for the following week. The field evaluation was the culmination of our training. It was a week-long exercise in the Vorkath 7 wilderness designed to test everything we'd learned. Combat skills, survival skills, team coordination. It was also designed to be brutal. The wilderness was hostile in ways that even the facility couldn't match, and the instructors were expected to push us to our limits. Expect casualties, Lieutenant Karel said, his voice echoing through the briefing room. The environment is unforgiving. The creatures are dangerous. Mistakes will be fatal. The instructor's expectation is that at least 10% of the trainees will not return. I looked around the room. There were about 200 trainees, mostly Zelkari with a smattering of other species. The air was tense, charged with a nervous energy that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Sergeant Chen, Lieutenant Karel was looking directly at me. You seem concerned. I'm concerned about the air conditioning, sir. The grinding laugh. Always the air conditioning with you. You're aware that you won't have air conditioning in the field. Yes, sir, but I'll have a survival suit with a built-in cooling system. The suits are standard issue, yes. Of course. And the cooling systems are designed to work in a wide range of environments. They are. Good, I nodded, a gesture of satisfaction. Then I'm not concerned. The field evaluation started at dawn. We were dropped in the wilderness by transport shuttle, left to fend for ourselves with nothing but our survival suits, our weapons, and a few days' worth of supplies. The environment was even worse than I'd expected. The temperature was pushing 40 degrees, and the terrain was a nightmare of sharp rocks and thorny vegetation. The sky was perpetually orange, and the sun seemed to hang motionless, watching us with that malevolent eye. Stay close, I said to Medina and Johnson, who'd been assigned to my squad. The instructors are going to try to isolate us. They want to test our ability to work together. How do you know that? Johnson asked. I read the training manual, all 80 pages of it. You actually read the whole thing. I had time. There wasn't much else to do while I was sweating to death. We moved through the wilderness, navigating by the stars and the terrain. The instructors were watching us, I knew. They'd be grading us on every decision we made, every step we took. The first attack came on the second day. A pack of something large and fast and hungry, charging out of the rocks with a howl that chilled the blood. Contact, I shouted, raising my weapon. Formation now. The squad moved together, bodies automatically falling into the defensive pattern we drilled 100 times. The creatures were fast, faster than I'd anticipated, and they were everywhere. I fired and one of the creatures went down. Another one charged at Medina, and I took it out with a quick burst of fire. Johnson was shooting too, his face a mask of concentration. The fight lasted for maybe 5 minutes. When it was over, 4 of the creatures were dead and the rest had fled. "Everyone okay?" I asked, my voice tight with adrenaline. "Fine," Medina said. "That was close." "Stay alert." I checked my weapon. "There's more out there, I can feel it." The next few days were a blur of combat and survival. The wilderness was alive with threats, and we were pushed to our limits. We took casualties, though not as many as the instructors had expected. My squad's survival rate was significantly higher than average. By the 5th day, we were exhausted and running low on supplies. The instructors were still testing us, throwing new challenges at us every few hours. And then the heat hit. I'd been managing the heat pretty well with the built-in cooling system in my survival suit. But the suit's cooling capacity was limited, and the external temperature had been rising steadily. "The cooling system is failing," I said to Medina. "It can't keep up." "Failing? What do you mean failing?" "I mean it's not cooling enough. The internal temperature is rising, and if it gets too high, I'll start suffering from heat stroke." Medina's face went pale. "What can we do?" "I need to rest, find some shade, let the suit cool down." "There's no shade out here." She looked around at the barren landscape. "It's all rocks and dirt." "Then I'll have to make shade." I pulled out my emergency blanket, a thin, reflective sheet that was designed to protect against extreme temperatures, and draped it over a rocky outcropping. The result was a small patch of shadow, not much, but enough. "Keep watch," I said. "I need to rest for at least an hour." "Is it going to be enough?" "It has to be." The rest helped, but not enough. The cooling system was still struggling, and I could feel the heat building up in my body. I was starting to get dizzy, and my head was pounding. "Sergeant," Johnson's voice came through the comms. "Incoming." "What is it?" "Unknown, but they're not instructors." I forced myself to my feet, my body screaming in protest. Through the shimmering heat, I could see movement, a group of figures approaching across the barren landscape. "Arm up," I said, "weapons ready." The figures resolved into a group of Zelkari trainees. They were moving slowly, their bodies hunched against the heat. They looked exhausted, desperate. "Human," one of them called out, "please, we need help." "What kind of help?" "We lost our supplies. The creatures attacked our camp. We have no water, no shelter." I looked at the Zelkari. There were 7 of them, all struggling to stand in the oppressive heat. They were still armed, but their weapons were lowered, their postures non-threatening. "I've got water," Johnson said quietly. "Enough for a few days." "Don't give it to them," Medina said. "They're Zelkari. They'd leave us to die without a second thought." "Maybe," I said, "but we're not them." I walked over to the Zelkari and handed them a canteen. The leader of the group stared at me with something like surprise. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. "Because you need help," I said, "and because that's what humans do." I spent the next hour distributing water and sharing supplies. By the time I was done, the Zelkari group was in significantly better shape, and I was completely depleted. "You're going to kill yourself," Medina said, her voice tight with anger. "Giving away our supplies, exposing yourself to the heat. It's suicide." "Maybe, but at least I'll die doing the right thing." "You humans," the Zelkari leader was shaking his head. "You're all the same. You'd give your last water to an enemy just to prove you're better than them." "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said. "I'm just trying to survive. And right now, that means making sure we all survive." The heat was getting worse. The cooling system in my suit was on the verge of failure, and I could feel myself slipping in and out of consciousness. The world seemed to shimmer around me, the orange sky melding into the red-brown ground. "Sergeant," it was Johnson's voice, urgent. "Sergeant, you need to stay awake." "I'm awake." My own voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. "I'm fine." "No, you're not fine. Your skin is burning up. You're going into heat stroke." I'm just. Stay with me, stay with me." I felt hands on me, pulling me into the shade. Someone was pouring water over my face, and I could hear voices arguing around me. "The Zelkari," I mumbled. "They need water." "They've got water. You're the one who needs help." The hands were insistent, and I was too weak to resist. The world was spinning around me, the orange sky blending into the brown ground into a dizzying whirl of colors. "Stay with me, Sergeant," Johnson said. "You're going to be fine, just stay with me." "Air conditioning," I mumbled. "I want air conditioning." There was a laugh from somewhere above me. "You're delirious. You're dying of heat stroke and you're still complaining about the air conditioning." Dies never. Part 5, The Resolution. I woke up in a medical bay. The lighting was low and the air was cool, actually cool, not just cool by Zelkari standards. Sergeant Chen, a Zelkari doctor, was standing over me, her eye membrane scanning a medical display. "You've made an impressive recovery. Most humans would have been dead with the levels of heat exposure you experienced." "What happened?" My voice came out as a croak. "The field evaluation is over. You were airlifted out of the wilderness after you collapsed. The instructors confirmed that you suffered from severe heat stroke. You were in a coma for 3 days." 3 days? I've been out for 3 days. "The other trainees," I said. "Medina, Johnson, are they okay?" "The humans are fine. So are the Zelkari you helped, for what it's worth. They reported that you gave them your water, your supplies, and your shelter when you could barely stand yourself. It was the right thing to do." "The right thing." The doctor made that grinding sound that passed for laughter. "Your species has an unusual definition of right." "I've been told that before." I lay back on the medical bed and stared at the ceiling. The air was cool and the bed was comfortable. For the first time in months, I felt almost human again. "Sergeant Chen," a new voice. Lieutenant Karel had entered the room, his eye membranes doing that sideways slide. "I'm pleased to see you're alive. It would have been inconvenient if you died." "Pleased to be alive, sir. Thank you for the medical care." The care was provided by the facility's medical staff. I had nothing to do with it. "Understood, sir." Lieutenant Karel stared at me for a long moment. His eye membranes flickered, and I could see the calculation behind them. "You've achieved something remarkable," he said finally. "Not the modifications to the environmental system, though that was certainly innovative, but the field evaluation. The instructors expected casualties, significant casualties. They had calculated that at least 10% of the trainees would not return." "And did they?" "No, not a single trainee died during the evaluation. Not one. And the instructors attribute this unexpected outcome to one factor. Me. To the human squad, to the leadership of Sergeant Chen." He paused. "The instructors were wrong. They expected casualties. They planned for casualties. But the humans refused to accept that outcome." "Sir, I was just trying to survive." "Survival is its own reward." He turned toward the door. "The environmental system modifications have been approved officially. The facility will maintain a temperature of 28 degrees going forward. It's a compromise, as you put it, a balance." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. Thank the instructors who have to explain to their superiors why the human they thought was a liability turned out to be the best decision they've ever made." He left the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. I stared at the ceiling and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "You did it," Medina said, appearing in the doorway. "You actually did it." "I didn't do anything. I just didn't die." "That's doing something. That's doing a lot." She walked over to the bed and sat down in a chair beside it. "The instructors are talking about you. They're saying you're the first human who's ever been recommended for command track based on a field evaluation." "That's a lot of pressure." "You can handle it," she smiled. "You handled the air conditioning, didn't you?" Part 6: The Aftermath. The next few months were a blur of activity. I was promoted to lieutenant, the first human to ever hold that rank at the Vorkath training facility. The instructors treated me with a grudging respect, and the other trainees looked up to me as an example of what was possible. Medina and Johnson both got transfers, as I'd known they would. They were sent to assignments far from the facility, assignments that would keep them safe from the Zelkari command structure. I stayed, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Someone needed to watch over the humans who would come after me. Someone needed to make sure they didn't get the same treatment I'd gotten. The environmental system modifications had been officially approved, and the facility temperature was maintained at 28 degrees. The Zelkari grumbled, but they didn't complain as much as they used to. They'd learned that sometimes the human way was better. But the changes I'd made went far beyond the temperature. The instructors had learned something important about humans during the field evaluation. They'd learned that humans were resourceful, resilient, and surprisingly effective in crisis situations. They'd also learned that humans were stubborn. "I think it's finally starting to sink in," I said to Medina during her final days at the facility. "The Zelkari are starting to understand that humans have something to offer." "Took them long enough," she said. "It only took a field evaluation that almost killed you." It was worth it. I meant it too. The changes I'd made, the lives I'd saved, it had all been worth it. Sergeant Lieutenant Chen, a Zelkari instructor, approached me. He was carrying a data slate, his eye membranes flickering with something that might have been curiosity. "The environmental system is reporting an anomaly." "What kind of anomaly?" "The temperature is rising. It appears to be a malfunction in the cooling systems." I felt a smile spread across my face. "I'll take care of it." I walked through the facility, feeling the cool air on my skin. The modifications I'd made were still working, still keeping the temperature at a comfortable level. The system was more efficient than it had ever been. I found the problem in the main control room, a faulty sensor that was giving false readings. I corrected it quickly, and the temperature stabilized at the new normal. The Zelkari technician in the room watched me with those sideways flickering eyes. "You really are obsessed with the environmental systems." "It's not obsession, it's attention to detail." I turned to face him. The facility was designed by Zelkari for Zelkari, but this facility is used by multiple species. It was only a matter of time before someone realized that the design needed to be optimized. "Optimized? You humans always use that word." "It's a good word." I walked toward the door, then paused. "By the way, you might want to check the internal temperature sensors in the barracks. The cooling system is designed to maintain a constant temperature, but there are variations based on external factors." "What kind of variations?" "The sun's position, the time of day, the heat output of the equipment in the room. All those factors affect the temperature distribution. If you want to maintain a constant temperature across the entire facility, you need to account for those variations." The technician stared at me. "How do you know all this?" "I read the schematics, and I spent a lot of time in the maintenance corridors. You learn a thing or two when you're sweating to death." The months passed. I became something of a legend at the facility. The human who'd complained about the air conditioning and ended up redesigning the entire environmental system. The human who'd survived a field evaluation that was supposed to kill him. The human who'd proven that humans could match, and sometimes exceed, the Zelkari in every way that mattered. The instructors still expected casualties. That was how they were taught. Zelkari had a different approach to training, to leadership, to life. They believed in strict hierarchy and clear expectations, and above all, in following the rules. Humans didn't work that way. We worked on instinct and stubbornness, and a refusal to accept that something was impossible. I was assigned to train a new cohort of recruits, humans, Zelkari, and other species. I taught them everything I'd learned. The combat skills, the survival skills, the leadership skills. And I also taught them something else, something that wasn't in any manual. I taught them that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to ignore the rules and do what needed to be done. That was the human way. That was the only way to survive in a universe that was constantly trying to kill you. One day, near the end of my tour, I got a message from Medina. She was assigned to a planetary defense force on some world I'd never heard of. She was doing well, she said. She'd adapted. "I'm thinking of putting in for a transfer to your facility," she wrote. "The pay's better, and I've heard the air conditioning is amazing." I read the message and smiled. The air conditioning. Always the air conditioning. It had started as a complaint, a minor gripe about a minor inconvenience. It had become a battle cry. It had become something that made humans stand out in a galaxy full of other species. I wrote back, "The air conditioning is amazing, and there's always room for one more human." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the monitors on the wall. They showed the facility's temperature readings, the cooling system's performance, the energy efficiency of the modifications I'd made. The systems were working perfectly. The temperature was stable at 28 degrees. The instructors were satisfied. The trainees were comfortable. And the air conditioning was still the best thing I'd ever done. The instructors expected casualties. They'd built their entire training methodology around the assumption that some people would fall, some would fail, some would die. It was a cold, clinical way of looking at the world. But they hadn't counted on the humans. They hadn't counted on our stubbornness, our refusal to accept the inevitable. They hadn't counted on the fact that we'd fight for every last degree of temperature.